Okay, in this chapter we're going to talk about this is going to be one of 4 chapters that talks about forms of industrial organization. So what we economists think of is that there are basically 4 types of industrial structures that exist. The first one, which will be the focus of this chapter, is called perfect competition. And by perfect competition, what we are saying is that there are many buyers and sellers. They sell a homogeneous product. That means that the product is not differentiable from who sells it. In other words, if I was a lover of corn, right, I love to eat corn, I wouldn't be able to tell if that corn came from Farmer Brown's crops or Farmer Jones's crops, right? Like corn is a pretty homogeneous product, just like oil. Right, I mean, we can kind of tell like the geographical region it comes from, like North Brent crude versus, Texas oil versus Canadian oil. But at the end of the day, oil is oil, just like corn is corn. So that's what's meant by a homogeneous product. There are no barriers to entry or exit. What that means is that buyers and sellers are free to come and go as they please. They don't have any significant investment that they had to make to enter the market or significant investment to get out of it, nor are there any regulations that stop them. Airlines would be the opposite of that, right? Airlines, you have to buy airplanes, you have to train workers, you have to buy, all the food and all the drinks for the plane, right? There's lots of setup costs and everything. In this case, both buyers and sellers can freely come and go as they please. And then finally, everyone is well informed about the price. That will be critical because what that will do is it will reflect the consumers are basically going to try to find always the lowest price that they possibly can. And sellers want to be able to sell it at the cheapest price possible. And all the buyers will gravitate towards the cheapest seller. And the seller that charges more won't be having any sales. So here's our perfectly competitive firm. The first type of firm we're going to look at in this chapter. Many buyers and sellers that sell a homogeneous or non-differentiated identical looking product where there are no barriers to entry or exit in this marketplace and everyone has full knowledge about the prices. This is at one end of the extreme. At the opposite end of this spectrum, I'm just going to list the others because we'll deal with those in other chapters. The one that is a bit more realistic, and we'll deal with in the next video, is called monopolistic competition. In this case, the products are going to be slightly differentiated, and there's going to be fewer sellers. After the exam, we'll have the oligopoly as one of the early chapters in that section. This would be where there are actually only 5 to 8 sellers of a product. That would be something like the airline industry or the automobile industry. There are significant startup costs that really make entry and exit very difficult, which then also means that there are very few sellers. Another example would be the cell phone business. And then finally, we have the monopoly, which would be only a single seller selling the product. So in these cases, the spectrum is many, many buyers and sellers, fewer buyers and sellers, only 5 to 8 buyers and sellers, or sellers really, and then only a single seller. So we're basically diminishing the number of sellers as we go down this. Don't worry, if you like the game Monopoly, this probably won't ruin your love for that game. And we don't have a Connect 4 type of industrial structure, so I'm not going to ruin that game as well. Okay, Connect 4 is just a really wonderful game. Okay. let's start to look at the perfectly competitive market now. So we said that the perfectly competitive market is one where many buyers and sellers that sell a non-differentiated product in an environment where everyone knows the prices and where entry and exit is possible at zero cost. What that would mean, now let's just pick corn. I think we can all agree that corn, let's just say it doesn't, we're not involving tractors and things like that or purchasing the land. What we're really just looking at here is the idea that the corn is non-differentiated and that, everyone pretty much knows the price of that corn. So if you accept that being the case, this would be the entire market for corn, where there's a demand curve and a supply curve. This would be us, the consumers that are buying the corn, it being sold. Now, what we said was that in this perfectly competitive environment, everyone knows about the price, right? And no one, since it's a non-differentiated product, everyone will buy the good where it is the cheapest. That would mean that for a single firm, that's perfectly competitive, its demand curve will be infinite as long as it's charging the market price, the equilibrium price, because that would be the lowest price possible, the equilibrium price. In essence, as long as a single firm is charging the equilibrium price, they can sell as much or as little as they want. They have infinite demand as long as they're charging the market price. Now, that demand is also equal to the price, right? Because every time they sell one more unit, right, they still are charging this price. And it's also the marginal revenue, or MR, the change in the total revenue for the change in quantity. Every time they sell one more good, the total revenue changes by the marginal revenue. Now, firms in this case are called price takers. And each firm's input is basically a perfect substitute for a different firm. Because it's perfectly competitive, every firm that sells the good, other firms sell an exactly identical good. So every good is a perfect substitute for one another. Now, take note of the fact that the demand curve is the same as the marginal revenue curve. That's not going to be the case as we look at other kinds of firms. Now, what that would then also mean is that if we were to graph out the total revenue, which is equal to P times Q, that this would be starting at 0, right? 0 units sold, so no revenue to be earned, and this would be increasing at a constant rate, where the slope is equal to the marginal revenue. Now that's going to be significant for us because we should remember from the last chapter that the total cost curve is going to play a role here. And that the total cost curve starts at 0 and is kind of shaped like this. Now it's shaped like this, we know, because of the total product curve. But what do firms try to do? And regardless of the type of firm it is, how it's organized, whether it's perfectly competitive or monopolistically competitive, what firms always try to do, their single solitary goal is that they're trying to maximize profit. That would mean maximizing the difference between total revenue and total cost, where you want total revenue to exceed total cost, right? You don't want to maximize the loss. You don't want to have total cost greater than total revenue. You want total revenue to be the greatest distance from total cost. Right? Which would appear right here, right? You get your total revenue at its greatest distance from total cost. That's going to give us some way to think about how much the firm should sell, right? And what that's going to do for us is it's going to remind us of one of the primary goals. So we said the one thing that we did say so far is that firms try to maximize profit. Again, we're going to use profit as a pi symbol. So if firms are trying to maximize profit, the question is, how much do they have to sell to maximize the profit? Well, there's a rule for that, fortunately. And that rule will be where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Or where the slope of the total revenue curve is equal to the slope of the total cost curve. Now, why would that be important? If we show back to the picture that we just had here, you would basically be finding the quantity where you could get the marginal cost, which would be the line of tangency to the total cost curve, and the marginal revenue, which is the line of tangency to the total revenue curve. If you can get those two lines equal in slope, they would be parallel to each other. And it would be the point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. That would be the way that we're able to find how much is sold. So now, if we look at this for an individual firm, right, we showed earlier that for an individual firm, demand equals price equals marginal revenue. Now, how does the marginal cost curve shaped? If you remember from the previous chapter, it's shaped like a J. Look at that. Where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. This would tell us if the firm is charging, if the perfectly competitive firm is charging the equilibrium price, right, as given by, if we were to draw something on the side here, right, that in the entire market, there's a demand curve and a supply curve going across. We get the demand curve for the individual firm. How much does that individual firm sell? Even if they're charging the equilibrium price, well, they sell where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Now, that tells us that rule, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That tells us what the profit maximizing firm, how much of it should sell. Now, we have to remember, though, that the price is really outside of control for the individual firm, right? Because the individual firm has no influence over the market. An individual farmer has no control over the market price for corn. So then the question is, right, what does that firm